Hello, today I would like to present about my research paper. Before I present about that, let me introduce myself. My name is Widiyastuti. Here, my research paper title is Racism Toward African Americans, reflected in Angie Thomas, The Hate You Give. Biography. Angie Thomas was born in 1988 in Jackson, Mississippi and grew up there. In the Walter D. Myers Grant at 2015, she is an inaugural winner award by Widiyastuti Books. The Hate You Give was published in 2017 and became her debut novel. Her novel reached #1 in the New York Times bestseller on March 9, 2017. Before she published her novel, her greatest accomplishment was an article published in Right On magazine. And then introduction, now we are going to talk about what racism is. Nowadays, racism is one of the serious problems that occurs in this world. Racism is the treatment of a person to another person differently because of differences in skin color, language, ethnicity, culture, and belief or religions. There are three types of racism, such as individual racism, interpersonal racism, and institutional racism. Individual racism, according to Henry and Tater, is a form of racial discrimination that comes from conscious and unconscious personal prejudice that originate from individual assumption or belief. Interpersonal racism occurs between individuals that influence their public interactions. Institutional racism is unfair treatment of African Americans and benefits certain parties due to unfair or discriminatory actions by certain institutions such as police and schools. The topic of racism can be found in literary works such as film, novel, and poetry. Problem statements. There are three problems that we would like to be discussed. First, how does the author describe racism in the novel entitled The Hate You Give? Second, how do the characters fight against racism? And the last one, what are the impacts of racism in The Hate You Give? Methodology. There are three methods that I use to do this research paper, that is, research design, collect data, and object. First, research design. This research using qualitative method and using racism as the theory. The approach is a racist approach. Second, collect data. There are several steps to collect data. First, reading the novel. Second, interpreting the meaning of each quote and describing racism according to the quotation that have been collected. Third, object. The main object, of course, is the Hate You Give novel. Besides, I also use articles, websites, and journals as the secondary data. Findings. First, racism described in the Hate You Give novel. Second, the character fight against racism. The last one, impacts of racism in the Hate You Give. The first finding is racism described in the Hate You Give novel that I found in school. African Americans have less opportunities for education, which is why Star's parents sent her to Williamson for the best possible facilities. In general, African Americans are not allowed to go to school where white people are. White people think of African Americans as inferior and not equal to their race. African Americans have a lower chance of obtaining good school facilities. This makes them have a low chance of getting a job. Even companies do not consider it even though they have the same diplomas as white people. That is why Star's father sent her to a white school, so that Star would get the same perks as white people and have a better chance of getting a job. In addition, the school near where he lives also have very limited facilities unlike those in Williamson. Star's father deeply felt this injustice. It can be seen in Appendix for the quotation. Second, in the police station. The police, especially white policemen, have always thought that whatever African Americans do is criminal. African Americans are labeled as bad guys, drug dealers, rioters. There are a lot of unfair treatment by the police force of African Americans and whites. If they did something wrong like murder, they would be jailed and found guilty. But if the police is white, he will be rewarded and not punished for his actions. The truth that has been revealed by Starr is not even strong evidence, even though she is the only witness. In fact, when the police investigated Starr, he did not ask who the policeman shot Khalil. He only asked about Khalil. What Starr had said during the investigation seemed meaningless in the eyes of the police and the grand jury. They still blamed Khalil and justified the action of the police who shot Khalil. The grand jury decided the very unfair decision that the police who shot Khalil was not decided guilty. For the proof of this explanation can be seen the quotation in Appendix Table 2. The last, racism in neighborhood. African Americans as minorities often get oppressed just because they are black. Living in poor society and criminal environment makes people have assumption that African Americans are bad. For some whites, the names of African Americans are a little strange or even far from normal. This is what Chris felt. However, to African Americans, their name is not strange. They are just like white people. Normal or not normal is just a perspective. Everyone has their own perspective. No one can define exactly the meaning of the word normal. The second finding is the character fight against racism. In this section, I only focus on Starr, Carter, and Miss Ofra. The first action is Starr starting to tell the truth. Starr comes to the police station with her mother to do an investigation as a witness to Khalil's death. Starr explained that Khalil was innocent that night. Police think Khalil will harm him that night. What Starr had said seemed meaningless. Her testimony was still in doubt, because on the Monday night news provided information about Khalil being a drug dealer, only being told about his ugliness without telling that Khalil was unnamed that night. One of Starr's ways fighting against racism and seeking justice is by conducting interviews on TV shows and telling the truth in front of the grand jury. Starr is the only witness to Khalil's case. She has an important role in exposing the truth in public so that everyone, both white and black, can clearly know the truth of Khalil's death through him. The second action is protest. Starr, Miss Ofra, and the protesters do the protest on Carnation. They do the protest because the unfair decision of the grand jury in the Khalil case. In protest by Starr and African Americans, and also some of the white people, she said that the aim of participating in the protest was not to say how Khalil was killed. The impact of racism, first, is that of African Americans. The continued persecution of whites resulted in the death of many African Americans. Police brutality, because they felt that they had the power in society, made them do whatever they wanted. It was also experienced by Khalil. The police shot him 3 times without any wrongdoing by Khalil. Second is psychological health. White people's racism treatment made African Americans feel anxious and terrified. This was how Starr felt when she became the only witness Khalil's death, which was carried out by the police without any mistakes that Khalil did that night. Conclusion: racism occurs in school, the police institution, which is a place where racism often occurs, and neighborhood where African Americans live. Starr struggled to be brave and recover her fear. Not only she who seeks for justice, there was also Miss Ofra, the woman from Just Ask for Justice. The impact of racism are the death of African American and psychological health. Suggestion: we as humans should respect each other. We must make friends and socialize with fellow human beings regardless of skin color, race, or origin. But stigma is often attached to African Americans, one of which is stigma of criminal. The impact of this racism can make mental health disturbed, lose self-confidence, and feel alienated. Thank you.